Over the past 2 days, we've witnessed a troubling escalation in the Israel-Gaza conflict. Israel has intensified bombardment across Gaza despite mounting pressure from the United States and international actors to halt its attacks. What's happening on the ground? Why is the U.S. pressure not holding sway, and what are the consequences for civilians and diplomacy? In this video, I'll walk you through the latest developments, analyze the driving forces, and explore what this means going forward. In Gaza, night after night, the skies have lit up with explosions. Airstrikes and artillery fire have pounded residential neighborhoods, displacing families already living under siege. The areas hardest hit are Gaza City and its peripheries, where Israeli forces have sought to encircle districts still held by Hamas fighters. Local health authorities report dozens of deaths in each 24-hour period, with children and non-combatants among the casualties. Hospitals already stretched thin are overwhelmed. Some are damaged or under fire, complicating medical care and evacuation of the wounded. UNICEF has warned that fragile babies are at high risk amid power cuts and proximity to shelling. Israel, for its part, frames the bombardment as necessary to degrade Hamas's military capabilities and pressure them into accepting a ceasefire deal. Earlier in the conflict, Israel issued warnings for civilians to evacuate from northern Gaza toward the south, declaring certain zones combat areas. But as many observers note, evacuation is perilous, and many civilians either can't or won't leave, some because they have nowhere safe to go, others because travel under bombardment is too dangerous. Meanwhile, the United States has publicly pressed Israel to stop the bombing. Former President Donald Trump, now acting in U.S. political leadership, demanded an immediate halt following Hamas's partial acceptance of his 20-point plan, which calls for ceasefire, hostage exchange, Israeli withdrawal, and phased disarmament. Yet despite the U.S. pressure, airstrikes have continued. On the second day of this intensified bombing, reports indicate at least 36 Palestinians were killed. In some sectors, operations were scaled back or reoriented to more limited defensive strikes in apparent response to U.S. demands. Nevertheless, the damage is already done. Infrastructure is demolished, civilians are in terror, and the humanitarian situation is rapidly deteriorating. So why isn't U.S. pressure proving sufficient? A few factors help explain that gap. First, Israel's government is under domestic pressure. Many Israelis and political factions see Hamas as an existential threat, and there is strong support for a hard line. Leaders worry that backing off now would appear weak, emboldening militants. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has often asserted that military pressure is needed to achieve security and the release of remaining hostages. Second, the U.S. pressure is complicated by conflicting priorities. While the U.S. publicly calls for restraint, it also remains a staunch security partner of Israel, supplying military aid and weapons. Some U.S. officials argue that Israel has the right to defend itself against rocket attacks, and that Hamas bears responsibility for endangering civilians by embedding forces in urban areas. This balancing act weakens Washington's ability or willingness to enforce its demands. Third, Israel frames the timing strategically. Maintaining bombardment while negotiating allows it to retain leverage. By keeping pressure on Hamas and inflicting damage, Israel hopes to force Hamas into more favorable concessions before agreeing to any pause. In effect, Israel treats the pauses not as humanitarian gestures, but as tactical tools to extract more. Fourth, enforcement of U.S. pressure is limited. Washington may issue statements, withhold certain military authorizations, or threaten political costs, but ultimately Israel retains autonomy over its military decisions. Moreover, international bodies like the UN have limited enforcement mechanisms in such conflicts, making it difficult to compel a halt when one party refuses. As for the humanitarian dimension, the consequences are devastating. Tens of thousands of Gazans are displaced yet again, forced into makeshift camps with little access to water, food, sanitation, or medical care. The collapse of health systems combined with rising disease outbreaks, malnutrition, and psychological trauma is inching Gaza toward catastrophe. The ongoing bombardment of medical facilities violates international norms, and repeated hospital strikes raise questions of war crimes and accountability. Journalists and medical staff are among the casualties, further constraining the flow of information and assistance. Diplomatically, this escalation complicates ceasefire talks. Hamas, reviewing the U.S. proposal, has expressed reservations accepting some terms but rejecting full disarmament or loss of political legitimacy. Other Palestinian factions criticize the plan as overly favorable to Israel. Some countries, notably Egypt and Qatar, are attempting to mediate, pressing both sides toward a deal before further deterioration. But the prospect of agreement is tenuous, especially given divergent priorities. Israel wants to maintain military leverage, Hamas wants guarantees of security and political survival, and civilians demand protection first and foremost. Looking ahead, here are possible trajectories. One scenario is that under sustained international pressure, Israel agrees to a temporary ceasefire or pause. But these have in past proved fragile temporary halts, followed by renewed fighting. Without strong enforcement mechanisms, any pause risks collapse. Another scenario is continued escalation. If Hamas stalls or rejects parts of the U.S. plan, Israel might intensify operations further, aiming for deep incursions, more destruction of infrastructure, and an all-out assault on remaining areas held by Hamas. A third possibility is incremental negotiation. The two sides may agree first on a limited hostage exchange and humanitarian windows, gradually expanding to a more durable ceasefire. But this would require trust mechanisms, third-party guarantees, and robust monitoring. In any case, civilian protection must remain central. Ceasefires without meaningful safeguards will leave communities exposed anew. Humanitarian aid corridors, safe evacuation routes, and reconstruction aid must be embedded in any agreement, not as optional extras, but as core components. From the U.S. side, if the rhetoric is to match the pressure, Washington would need to couple its demands with concrete consequences, suspension of arms transfers, diplomatic cost for violations, and stronger backing of international legal mechanisms. Without that, pressure remains symbolic. For global civil society, media, and human rights actors, the role is to document abuses, amplify humanitarian needs, and keep alive the moral urgency. Silence is complicity when bombs fall on hospitals, when children die in the dark, and when voices are crushed under rubble. As we watch the second day of intensified bombardment turn into a third, a fourth, and beyond, the question is not just who prevails militarily, but who preserves human dignity, who ensures accountability, and who secures a peace that does not simply pause war, but ends it. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments, and if you want follow-up coverage or deeper dives into particular aspects, whether the legal angle, humanitarian efforts, or diplomatic responses, I'll be glad to bring the